Marty Murray Coaching. Today we're doing the fifth of a series on verbal strategy. Today's episode is going to be on increasing your accuracy in critical reasoning to take your performance to the next level. There's links to the others, some of the previous episodes in the below. You can find those as well. We did a couple on critical reasoning. We did a couple on reading comprehension, how to speed up, how to get some basics. Today it's going to be a little more advanced session. We're going to be talking about a little more advanced topics, not the basics of critical reasoning, but really how to get your accuracy higher once you've kind of started, And we're going to be doing some things that I've seen work for many people working with me, some key moves that can take your accuracy higher and really get you to that top critical reasoning score that you're looking for. So let me share my screen. We'll start with some basics. There are four main aspects of increasing your accuracy. Okay, one of them is thoroughness. We're going to be talking a lot about that, how to be thorough. Another is precision. The third is sophistication, and the fourth is intensity. And all these four are going to add up to that super high accuracy that we're looking to achieve, right? And these are going to be thematic through this entire presentation. Let's start with a question. When you do this question, I want you to think about what you need to do to get it right. And one thing that's going to be really key, our first topic is going to be the setup. The setup, when you go through the passage, go through the question stem, you really have to be properly set up or well set up to know what you have to do to get the question right. Okay. So check your setup, go through this passage, see what's going on, go through the answers and see what you think. And then once you're ready, you can put your answers into the chat and let me know when you're ready to continue discussing. What do you think? Any ideas on what's correct? Spend like another 30 seconds on this one. Yeah, put your answers in the chat and let's hit this. Let's go through and explain it. Okay. So for this question, what I want to talk about, the reason I'm bringing this up is it really demonstrates the idea of setting up effectively. Okay. So we can go through this passage and see that it presents a situation with this broad spectrum weed killer and weeds that are competing with crops for sunlight, water, and nutrients, and it presents a difficulty how to keep the crops from being killed along with the weeds. For at least some food crops, specially treated seeds that produces plants resistant to weed killers is under development. This resistance wears off as plants mature. And then it says, therefore, the special seed treatment will be especially useful for plants that, right? Okay. So we can see that the correct answer has to describe these plants, right? Plants that do something. But here's the thing. The reason I'm mentioning setup is we also really want to understand the whole context of the passage, okay? For high accuracy, you want to get the whole passage, and because everything is going to matter, or a lot of different things are going to matter here, okay? For instance, it says, therefore, well, we're looking at that therefore, that's pointing back to something, right? Therefore what? Therefore, well, the therefore is a result of, this resistance wears off as the plants mature, right? So we're going to have to take that into account. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with the setup, okay? So the correct answer has to describe the plants. It's going to be how it's useful for them, or why it's useful, what type of plants is useful, rather. But it has to go back to this part. It says, therefore, it's useful for this reason. And we have to keep in mind this thing about this resistance wears off as the plants mature. So with a proper setup, you want to have everything under control going into the question. So let's go through these answer choices and see why I'm mentioning this. Choice A, right? Plants that produce their crops over an extended period of time, as summer squash does. Well, it says the resistance wears off as the plants mature. So if they produce their crops over an extended period of time, it's not going to work out because they're going to mature before the thing is going to wear off before they mature and produce their crop, right? Looking at B, produce seeds that are large seeds that are easy to treat effectively as corn and beans do. Now, I think a lot of you caught this. This would be, it says it's especially useful for plants that blank. Well, if we considered only that, it would be probably especially useful for plants that produce seeds that are easy to treat effectively, right? But the point is, it's not just that. We have to keep in this resistance wearing off as the plants mature in mind also, and this has nothing to do with the resistance wearing off as the plants mature. So you can see how our setup saves us from that trap choice. I'm going to skip C for now, go to D. Are typically grown in large tracts devoted to a single crop. Well, that doesn't really seem to have any connection. I mean, we want to think about it a little bit. I'm not going to say it's using the wrong words, but it doesn't really have a connection to the plants, resistance wearing off as the plants mature, right? The tract size. Finally, plants that are, if untreated, especially vulnerable to the effects of any weed killers sprayed nearby, right? Well, if they're, once again, the seed treatment could help in general plants that are vulnerable to weed killers. So E is a trap again, right? But why is E incorrect? Because our setup was good, and we knew that it had to take into account the resistance wearing off as plants mature. Therefore, the fact that if untreated, they're vulnerable doesn't make any sense at all, because if it wears off if they're untreated, I mean, if they're vulnerable when untreated and it wears off, then, well, it's not going to work out. But going back to C, okay, provide as they approach maturity shade dense enough to keep weeds from growing, right? Well, that totally fits. If it wears off and then they provide shade after it wears off to keep the weeds from growing, well, it totally fits. So you can see how our setup guides us to choice C. And this one wasn't particularly challenging. You had to see you had to catch that one thing. But the main point here is the setup is going to be really key. Are there any questions about this question? Let me know. And so the key thing with your setup, you want to fully understand the passage, okay? You really, I've seen people's scores increase dramatically just from paying more attention to the passage. I saw someone literally go from 50% accuracy to over 80% accuracy in one session, just because we decided that she could do better by understanding the passage better, right? And I mean, how could that make such a difference? I mean, if I get the passage generally, doesn't that work? Yeah, if you sort of get it, but if you really need to fully understand it, not a vague sense of it, right? Those are two different things. The next thing is we're going to notice key details, as we did with that therefore statement. It was a key detail, right? and the whole thing about the resistance and about why the treatment is needed. All these were key details that help guide us toward the correct answer. Sometimes they're easier to notice, and other times they're not. In any case, noting key details is part of our setup. Finally, we want to identify exactly what the correct answer must do. And I mean, once again, does that sound obvious? Maybe a little bit, but it's easy to think, oh, the correct answer has to fill this blank. It has to say why these plants are good, or something else that's kind of vague and not exactly what the correct answer must do. And that's going to impact your accuracy. So the more exactly we determine what the correct answer must do, the more accurate we're going to be and the higher our score is going to be, right? Okay. Just checking to see if we have any questions come in. Okay, cool. Let's do another question. And when we do this next one, think about the setup. Really, fully understand the passage, note the key details, and understand exactly what the correct answer must do. And there's some other things we're going to do in this next question as well. It's a little harder than the previous one. But get your setup right, and I think that's going to help, and we'll see how it helps with eliminating some of the trickier choices. About 2 minutes for this one as well. Any other ideas? You can, yeah, just put them in. Let's see. Give you another 15 on this. Any other ideas? Tough question, right? A little tricky. There's some key things we can see in the setup here. Okay, let's hit it. In this question, the passage presents a situation where it's been found that people who smoke light cigarettes, which produce diluted smoke, so there's a detail, have about the same risk of experiencing smoking-related illnesses as those who smoke regular cigarettes. Nevertheless, some wellness pundits have called for laws that allow selling of only regular cigarettes and ban light cigarettes. And then the question stem, so we see it's a paradox, right? We see, okay, I get what's going on here. It's a little odd that if they have the same risk of experiencing smoking-related illnesses as those who smoke regular cigarettes, that the wellness pundits want to ban the light cigarettes and not the regular. Okay, so what's going on here? It says, which of the following, if true, best explains why wellness pundits have taken this surprising position? So as we're talking about with our setup, we want to be very clear about what the correct answer has to do. So in this case, we're saying the position is surprising because they have the same risk of smoking related illnesses, the people who smoke the cigarettes, right? It doesn't say the cigarettes are the same. It says the people who smoke them have the same risk of experiencing smoking related illnesses. And that's a little different, right? And then the wellness pundits still want to ban the light cigarettes, which is a kind of a strange position. Okay. So basically the correct answer has to explain why the wellness pundits would ban the light ones. They're basically saying there's some reason they're bad. I mean, that's probably what's going on here, right? Probably some reason why they want to ban them. At least there must be something different about the light cigarettes from the regular cigarettes, right? So how, something about a difference. Now let's go through these choices. Choice A, by defeating the features that light cigarettes use to produce diluted smoke, smokers can cause them to produce smoke similar to that produced by regular cigarettes. Well, okay, this sounds like an issue. And one thing I want to bring up with this choice, if anybody had trouble reading it, like you said, well, what does defeating the features mean? We really have to be very clear about what a choice means, okay? I would say that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to know why the word defeating is used in this sentence. We really want to get the main thing it says, right? And the key thing it's saying is they can produce smoke similar to that produced by regular cigarettes, right? So basically, this choice is saying that light cigarettes can be made the same as regular cigarettes, isn't it, right? Well, the fact that they're the same or they can be the same would not be a reason to ban them, so A is out. Let's go to C. The smoke filters on regular cigarettes make them somewhat less harmful to smokers' health than unfiltered cigarettes. Now, this is a tricky choice because it sounds like the regular cigarettes are better than another kind of cigarettes, and you might say, well, how do I know the unfiltered aren't the light? Which means that the regular cigarettes are better and the light are worse. Well, here's where our setup comes in, okay? If we go up to the passage, it says the same risk of smoking-related illnesses as those who smoke regular cigarettes. From that information, right, the same risk, we can tell that these unfiltered cigarettes must not be the light cigarettes because we know that the unfiltered cigarettes are worse for your health. So if we have a good setup, C is gone, and that's part of how we're going to get that high accuracy. Once again, demonstrating the power of a high setup, power of a strong setup. Okay, D, the secondhand smoke produced through smoking light cigarettes is just as dangerous to those around smokers that produced through smoking regular cigarettes. Well, once again, that's saying they're the same. It's just as dangerous, right? Gone. That's not a reason to ban one and not the other. Now, E is the trickiest one here. To inhale light from light cigarettes, the same amount of smoke that a smoker would get from regular cigarettes, a smoker must smoke more cigarettes. That doesn't necessarily sound good. But here's the thing. Once again, if our setup is strong, okay, then you go back up to the top, and you realize that it already said that they have the same risk of smoking-related illnesses. So regardless of whether people that smoke light cigarettes are smoking more or smoking less or whatever it is, they have the same health risk. So it doesn't really matter. This doesn't really mean much. In fact, we can kind of tell that maybe they're not smoking more cigarettes because they have the same risk of smoking-related illnesses. In any case, this last choice is basically, it doesn't change what we know. It's saying they must smoke more. Well, it is diluted smoke, and we know it's not worse for their health to smoke more or somehow because it already said it in the passage. Our setup saved us. So now, what's the point here? Well, B is a little interesting. It says the smoke light cigarettes produce causes less of the throat irritation that alerts people to smoking dangers than is caused by the smoke regular cigarettes produce. And this choice is why I brought up this question. There was, I really want to talk about reading answer choices. A lot of people miss this question. It's easy to miss this question if you don't read the whole choice thoroughly. And we talked about thoroughness in one of our intro points here. Okay. Well, if we read the beginning of this choice, it says the smoke light cigarettes causes less throat irritation. Okay, great. That sounds like a benefit of light cigarettes. But if we keep reading, it says that alerts people to smoking's dangers. So basically, if we read this entire answer choice, we see that it starts out sounding better for light cigarettes, and it ends up sounding worse for light cigarettes because they actually don't have an alert that the regular cigarettes do. So basically, this choice is indicating that people who smoke light cigarettes might erroneously keep smoking because they're not being alerted the way people who smoke regular cigarettes are. So the point of this question, the point of bringing this up was really the need to fully understand and fully read answer choices. In the case of A, it's a little hard to understand for some people, defeating the features. If you haven't heard that term before, but you got to stick with it and make sure you understand the answer choice, right? Because it could be right or wrong. You don't know unless you've read it. And then B really demonstrates like, wow, you know, it's if you can easily get halfway through to the throat irritation part, decide that it's not correct because it sounds like the light cigarettes are better, when actually they're worse because they are lacking an alert, okay? So the key takeaway here is tip number 2. Make sure you fully understand and fully read each answer choice. You know, even if, put it this way, even if you think you know the answer already, unless you're totally pressed for time, read all the answer choices because sometimes 2 will work. And then you have to go find something in the passage, or 2 could seem to work, and then you have to go find something in the passage that separates them, right? So if you skip part of an answer choice, you don't understand when you're like, well, I already found the one that works. Not necessarily. So our next takeaway is read each answer choice from beginning to end. Be thorough in your handling of the answer choices, right? Ensure that you fully understand what each answer choice says. Identify the main thing conveyed by each answer choice, right? Some choices are harder to read than others. We haven't really necessarily seen that yet in the questions we've been looking at. Well, we kind of saw in the defeating one is, you know, choice A in that previous question, that could have been a little harder to read than some of the others. Some choices are harder to read than others. And one thing that we can end up doing is you get to a choice that's hard to read and you give it just as much energy as the other choices. And that doesn't work out because now you understand all the others, but you don't understand that one, right? So you have to adjust how much energy you put into each choice, right? If it's hard to read, spend more time reading it. You know, and it can be tough under test conditions, but you really just have to amp up. That's where that intensity aspect comes in. Okay. And finally, thoroughly read and analyze every answer choice, even if you believe you've already found the correct answer, as I just mentioned. Any questions about this? Yeah, we could say that. We could say that it's wrong. C is wrong because it's comparing filtered and unfiltered. I mean, if you know that unfiltered is not light, then obviously that's, you know, I don't really like the idea of calling an answer choice irrelevant, but most of the time they're not, you know, even ones that sort of seem irrelevant because they're talking about some sort of different topic, there's probably a connection. But in this case, it truly is irrelevant that we're comparing filtered and unfiltered in that one. Yeah, and someone's saying here it's basically the same thing. Yeah, C is basically out of scope, but we have to be really careful with that, okay? And we're going to talk about that in a minute or a few minutes. Just be careful with the whole out of scope thing because, you know, I mean, that choice definitely was choice C we're talking about in this question. This is out of scope, right? It's out of scope. But a lot of times something that seems out of scope or off topic isn't really. Like if we're talking about a company and it mentions something about the employees and nothing about the company, well, the employees do work for the company, right? Or they talk about taxes. Well, the taxes could affect the company, you know? So if you're talking about a company and the employees and then the choice talks about taxes, is that out of scope? Tough call, you know? So I'm hesitant to ever say anything's out of scope unless it's really clearly out of scope, as choice C is in this question. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so our next thing we're going to talk about is looking out for yellow flags, paying attention to yellow flags. This next question is a little tricky. That's actually rather tricky. We're doing some pretty hard ones today because, well, it's an advanced class on how to increase your accuracy. Presumably, you know the basics. So I'm saying look out for yellow flags. And what's a yellow flag? A yellow flag is something that's bugging you. You're like, huh, did I really think about that choice? Or why does this choice seem, you know, why do I have 3 correct answers? Like, what's going on? And not just going, not just blowing that off. Or if you're like, wait, you know, I don't really like my answer choice, that's a yellow flag. Take a look at this question and see what yellow flags you might have to pay attention to get it correct. You could definitely put your answers in if you have them. I know it takes a little longer, this one. It's definitely not an easy question. Spend another 15 on this. Any other ideas? What do you think? Okay, cool. Some interesting ideas. Yeah, I see E, D. What's going on with this thing? Right? This would be definitely, if you saw this question on the test, it probably means you're doing very well because it's pretty tricky. So let's take a look. You have this situation where researchers are investigating the effect of parental attention on the intellectual development of children. And they found that even after controlling for income and environment, the amount of positive attention parents gave to their children and their children's intellectual development was strongly correlated. The researchers therefore concluded that to ensure that the children develop well intellectually, parents must, and that's an interesting statement, they must do this. They must provide their children with much positive attention, right? So, okay. So there's our argument, and we can see it's an argument before going to the question stem. So that's why I kind of like reading the passage before the question stem, because we don't have to go to the question stem to see that this is an argument, right? So, okay. So now our setup in the situation is there's a correlation. The amount of positive attention gave to their children's intellectual was strongly correlated. And from that, we're going to this conclusion about what's necessary. Parents must provide their children with much positive attention, right? To ensure that their children develop well intellectually, rather. And notice, it's not that the researchers are just saying that parents must provide their children with positive attention. It's saying to ensure that their children develop well intellectually, right? So we've jumped from a correlation to something parents must do. There's one other thing we could notice as well. It doesn't say that this will work, does it? It says they must do it. It doesn't say it's the only thing they need to do. All of this matters. And there's one other part of our setup that we really need here. It says even after controlling for income and environment. That's a key detail that you may or may not see. If you don't see it, you can be okay if you pay attention to yellow flag. Okay? So now the question is, which of the following is an assumption upon which the researcher's reasoning depends? So the reasoning goes from a correlation about positive attention and intellectual development to a conclusion about what parents must do. So we have a pretty big jump there, and something has to be assumed for that evidence about the correlation to support the conclusion about what parents must do. Okay, let's look at choice A. A, in general, parents have enough respect for scientific researchers to follow the researchers' recommendations regarding how to support children's intellectual development. Well, we don't, it's not necessary for the parents to actually believe this for it to be the case. The researchers could be correct even if the parents don't really have any respect for the researchers, so A is out. That one's not too hard to get rid of. Now we look at B. Parents who give their children relatively large amounts of positive attention do not generally provide them with healthier diets than other parents provide. B is interesting. Because if the parents who give their children large amounts of positive attention do provide their children healthier diets than other parents provide, then it could just be that the reason for this correlation is that the kids with getting attention are also getting better diets, and it could be the diet rather than the attention. So B is basically saying there's not an alternative cause, which is healthier diet. I'm going to keep B. I mean, I'm not really sure if diet has anything to do with intellectual development, but it could. C, some parents are too distracted or too busy to provide children with the optimal amount of positive attention for their children to develop well intellectually. Well, this is almost going against it. I mean, it's like the idea that the parents are too busy. Do we have to assume they're too busy to assume what works? What they must do? Certainly not. So that's out. That's not too hard. That's our easy out. Probably one of our two easies. They're A and C. Now we get to D. The level of education of parents has no bearing on how well their children develop intellectually. This is hard to get rid of, so we might be tempted to choose it, because we do have this correlation jumping to a conclusion, basically some kind of cause and effect conclusion. And this seems to be ruling out an alternative cause, the level of education. So I'm going to keep D as well. And finally, we get to E. Children who get relatively large amounts of positive attention from their parents are not more likely to live in intellectually stimulating environments than other children. Well, gee, this definitely sounds like an assumption, because basically it's saying, look, it could be the environment rather than the attention, right? We know how these cause and effect arguments work. If they live in more intellectually stimulating environments and they're getting positive attention, we don't really know whether it's the positive attention or the environment that's causing them to develop well intellectually, right? Okay, great. So now we have, and it sounds pretty good, okay? Because if it is the stimulating environment, then the researchers are wrong and parents don't have to provide their children with much positive attention. So now here's why I want to point out yellow flags. The yellow flag here, if we decide that E is correct, is that B and D also look pretty good, right? So those are waving yellow flags. You know what I mean? Like something is wrong and we have to pay attention to it. So what do we do, right? What do we do with this situation? And this is why I'm saying pay attention to yellow flags. These are wildly waving yellow flags that maybe we have something wrong. They're not always that wildly waving, but this is the kind of thing you run into. And when you run into it, don't ignore it, okay? We definitely have to eliminate D and B, two of these choices, and not just choose D. So let's take a look. One thing we can do when you're not really sure, you run into a yellow flag, go back to the passage, okay? Go back to the conclusion. In this case, it says parents must provide. It's saying that positive attention is necessary. It's not saying that positive attention is the only thing that matters, right? Therefore, we can eliminate D, okay? Because D is basically saying, well, something else could matter as well, or could have an effect. If we negate it rather, the level of education may have some bearing on how well children develop intellectually. Well, if it has a bearing, does that mean that they don't need positive attention? Not necessarily, right? Just because something else could have an effect doesn't mean that something else isn't necessary. So D we can rule out for that reason. Now we're down to two answer choices, B and E, that both look the same, but we've paid our attention to yellow flags. E looks a little better because diet doesn't seem as connected to intellectual development as intellectually stimulating environment, which definitely makes E very tempting. But we're paying attention to our yellow flag and we figure we've got to figure out what's going on here, right? We're going hard, we're intensely, we're being thorough, we're going to be accurate, we're going to get this right. Go to the passage, right? Go to the passage and look, what does it say up in this line? Even after controlling for income and environment. So the researchers have already controlled for environment, right? They've already controlled for environment. So they are not assuming that these children are not more likely to live in intellectually stimulating environments. They've already taken environment out of the picture. Get it? Do we all get that? That was we paid attention to our yellow flag and we saw that environment has already been ruled out. So our correct answer is indeed B, because B is the one that also rules out an alternative cause, which is healthier diet. Okay, diet didn't sound as good as environment, but if we paid attention to yellow flag, that we're stuck with two answers that are very compelling. Then we go back to the passage, say, I got to get this right. There's something going on. Let me go back to this passage, reread, check, find something, support, go through those choices, find something, separate them, figure out which one is correct, and get this question correct. And that is how you get the score you want on this test. Determination and paying attention to those yellow flags. No. So, is that clear? Any questions about this one? Okay, let me know. So as we were saying, pay attention to yellow flags indicating you may have something wrong. If your gut is telling you, I didn't really do it right. You know, sometimes for me, if I'm not sure about my answer, or I don't like my answer, you know, if I'm going to miss one of these questions, it's when I don't like my answer. I don't like my answer, but I'm rushing through it because I'm preparing for a webinar or something. I'm like, yeah, I know the answer to this one. No, you don't. You didn't like your answer. It was wrong. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to anything bugging you about an answer choice and say, you know what? It's bugging me. I might not be right here. We're trying to get a high score. This is a test for graduate school. It's a pretty sophisticated test. We have to be super careful, of course, right? I mean, if you're running a business, if something is bugging you, you're like, well, you know, I don't know about this. Go take care. You would go take care of it, right? This is a test for business school. So that's the mentality you want to have. And, you know, to ensure that you get your question correct, keep going until your concerns are addressed. Figure it out. You know, I don't like that choice. And then you go, oh, man, I'm so glad I took another look at the passage, right? Because that way you do pay attention that you'll get the question correct. Okay. Oh, yeah. So the must part. So someone's asking about the must part, right? The must part. It's really important here. I mean, because there's two ways this conclusion could work. And this is a key thing. We have to notice the details of the passage. A lot of the time the conclusion will be, therefore, positive attention causes them to develop well intellectually. Okay, you know that that was the cause, or that is the main cause, that is the cause. Or there's another type of cause and effect question that says, if you do A, you will get B, right? So once again, we're assuming that A causes B, but it's a different type of cause and effect conclusion. It's saying if you do A, you'll get B, right? So it's saying A does cause B, basically. This doesn't say that. This says parents must provide their children with positive attention, right? They must do it. It's not something it's not saying this is going to work. It's saying it's something that's necessary. Kind of like if you're baking a cake and you say, well, flour is necessary. It doesn't mean it's the only thing you need, or that if you just throw flour in a pan, that's going to work, right? So this is kind of like that. It's saying they must do this. That's why D is incorrect, because even if your level of education has a bearing on how well the children develop intellectually, it's not the only ingredient. So it still could be the case that you must provide something. So one thing we want to do in GMAT prep is be good with seeing the difference between things that are necessary and things that are sufficient. In this case, the conclusion is about something being necessary. Okay. Okay, on to the next thing. So far we've talked about setup. We've talked about reading answer choices very carefully and in their entirety. And we've talked about these yellow flags. Like, you know, this is after you're already kind of almost done with the question. And you're like, I don't know, right? I mean, I know people say, well, you know, are you telling me to overthink? I'm not telling you to overthink. And people say, are you telling me to second guess? I kind of am. You know, and the funny thing, I was talking with someone, he said, I keep second guessing you. And we kind of figured out at some point, I'm like, you know what? I think the reason you're second guessing is because your first answer choice was also a guess. You first guessed too. If you're second guessing, you're probably first guessing also, right? So you got to pay attention to those yellow flags and figure out what's going on. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is being very, and this next question is hard too, is being sophisticated in your analysis of answer choices. You have to use sophisticated thinking. It is, once again, it's a test for graduate school. It's a sophisticated test. It's not a test of like, oh, which test, if an answer choice says all or everybody, I can eliminate it because it's too extreme, or it says different words from the passage, so it must not be on topic. That mentality is too simple. And this next question really requires us to be quite sophisticated in how we go through the answer choices. Once again, 2 minutes. Have fun with this one. It's one of the hardest ones I've seen. They're coming in. How about another 30 seconds on this one? I'd love to give you more time, but we have to keep moving. Any other answers? Not quite yet. Nobody saw it yet. Give it one more shot. Okay, let's go. This one was definitely tricky, and it demonstrates the need for very sophisticated thinking and answering the questions. Let's start with our setup. Much of the purpose of daylight saving time is to save energy by reducing the need for use of electric lights in the evening. Now that's background information, right? So it may seem as if it's not important, but it turns out to be very important in answering this question. However, it is likely that daylight saving time does not reduce energy use as much as it did in the past. Okay. And that's our conclusion. And then we have this support marker, since a greater percentage of people, of residents now have air conditioning, which people use more than they would without daylight saving time. So we can see what's going on here, right? It's saying that daylight saving time used to save more energy, but it's actually now started to create an effect that offsets its effect of saving energy by causing people to use their air conditioning. Okay, cool. Which of the following, if true, does most to strengthen the argument? So part of our setup, what does the correct answer have to do? Correct answer has to provide support for this conclusion. It is likely that daylight saving time does not reduce energy use as much as it did in the past. It needs to add some additional support for that. Right? Okay. And now notice it's a strengthening question. So it's not an assumption question. So the correct answer may or may not have anything to do with this thing about air conditioning. Now, we need to use sophisticated reasoning to go through these answer choices to see what's going on. Okay. With A, daylight saving time causes people to spend more time outdoors than they would otherwise. I mean, we could say, well, what does spending time outdoors have to do with anything? I mean, I think anybody could see that, well, maybe if people are spending time outdoors, they're not using their lights as much or electricity because they're outdoors where you don't use as much electricity, most likely as you would when you're in the house. So this is actually saying that daylight saving time still causes people to save energy. So A is probably not going to be good. Okay, A is out. Looking at B. Daylight saving time does not affect use of computers and other electronic devices as much as it affects use of electric lights. Seems on topic. So how can we think of this in a sophisticated way? Okay. And this is the type of thinking we want to use here. Daylight saving time does not affect computers and electronic devices, their use of them. Well, if it doesn't affect them, would that really change what's going on? Would it mean we're not saving as much energy? Well, if we were still saving energy from electric lights, it doesn't really matter if it's affecting these other things. It's basically saying nothing else changed, isn't it? That would be the sophisticated thinking for choice B. It's basically saying it's not making any other change. Well, if it's not causing any other effect, then it's not really, nothing has changed. So that wouldn't support our conclusion, right? Looking at C, recent advances in lighting technology have enabled electric lights to use less energy per unit of light produced. It doesn't mention daylight saving time. It does mention energy. I don't know what this has to do, but I'm a little concerned. I would be a little concerned that I'm not seeing a good reason to eliminate it. So I'd probably keep it. Let's look at D. Currently, a greater proportion of energy used in residences comes from solar power sources than did in the past. Here's where our setup is going to come into play. It says, it is likely, our conclusion, it is likely that daylight savings time does not reduce energy use as much as it did in the past, right? Okay. Well, energy used, this is mentioning energy used. So it's not like saying that these people are using less energy. It's saying that the source of energy is solar. Well, they're still using energy, so this D makes no difference. So we're down to C and E. E. Increases in average outdoor temperatures have caused people to have air conditioners to use them more than they would have in the past. That is very tempting as well, because we do see that the daylight saving time is connected to this air conditioning. People are using air conditioners. They have air conditioning, which people use more than they would without daylight saving time. So how are we possibly going to eliminate E? You know, what's going on with this? Look at it. Increases in average outdoor temperatures have caused people who have air conditioners to use them more than they would have in the past. Notice that this is basically saying that something else is causing people to use their air conditioners. It could have said, bunnies running through the yard are causing people to use their air conditioners. Does that have anything to do with daylight saving time? Not really. The passage said that daylight saving time is causing people to use their air conditioners. Now this is saying that something else is causing people to use their air conditioners. The two are not really connected, right? It's just another reason for people to use their air conditioners. It's not that people are getting more air conditioners. It's not that people are doing more daylight saving time or anything else. Actually, E is not connected to daylight saving time. It's just saying something else causes energy use. Okay, fine, but daylight saving time could still be saving energy. Got it? So it's not E. So then we're stuck with C. And here's where we have to do some seriously sophisticated thinking. Recent advances in lighting technology have enabled electric lights to use less energy per unit of light produced. Let's think about that mathematically as you would for a quant question or maybe a DS question. So electric lights don't use as much energy. And daylight saving time, as we saw in the background information, daylight saving time helps people save by reducing the need for electric lights. Well, if electric lights aren't using as much energy, then if you use them less, you're not really saving because they weren't using as much energy in the first place, right? So this kind of piles on. It's like not only are people using their air conditioners and more because of daylight saving time, well, the thing that was saving energy, which was not using your lights, isn't even doing much anymore because your electric lights, you have an LED light or something that doesn't use as much power. So C, it turns out to be correct because it's showing that, wow, C is, the pen pad is so sensitive. It keeps changing the screen and I'm turning off the pen and stuff. So anyway, we can see that C is correct because it shows that you're not saving as much because you're not using as much. So that was a pretty sophisticated question, right? And the point it makes is that to get the harder questions correct and increase our accuracy, we have to really think super carefully and see that E, a choice like E, makes no difference here because it's really just saying that there's another factor. It's not saying that daylight saving time is doing anything, and that C is correct because it's connecting to that background information on the reducing the need for use of electric lights. Isn't E a premise echo? Not really. I mean, it's not really. I wouldn't say it's a premise echo. E is basically saying that a greater, I mean, the passage says a greater percentage of premises have air conditioning, which people use more. When they have it, daylight saving time causes them to use it. E is saying when they have it, temperatures cause them to use it. So it's not really a premise echo. It's close. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So anyway, the point being, right, you want to increase your accuracy, go beyond in scope and out of scope. And let's once again look at a couple of these choices that are interesting. Choice B was interesting because it says does not affect the use. Well, if we think about that in an analytical way, if it doesn't affect their use, then it really is just basically saying it hasn't changed anything. And if you're saying, well, they are using more power, yeah, they are using more power because they have computers and other electronic devices. But using and not and saving less are two different things. Like if I spend more income, but I'm still saving $10 a month, you know, well, I'm still saving, right? It doesn't matter if I'm using more. Okay. So the point here, increase the level of sophistication of the thinking you use in answering the questions to increase your accuracy. Go beyond in scope versus out of scope to analyzing the logical implications, as we just saw with choice B and choice C in this question. What are the implications, right? Well, if they're okay, you get the idea. Okay. And carefully consider the relationship between each choice and the facts presented. But you really have to carefully consider it, right? I mean, because each seems so correct in this past one, right? But we really carefully considered it's just talking about a different way that energy gets used. Okay. Okay, cool. So now the next thing I want to mention is we saw a lot of this is just coming down to reading accurately and just picking up on little things and picking up on implications. So one thing I would suggest to get your accuracy higher is to do practice inference questions. I know that weaken is cool and assumption is cool, and we see a lot of strength in. Honestly, you should practice all kinds of critical reasoning questions because, for instance, complete the passage you might think is not on there very much, but I've seen it show up a lot on certain people's tests. So anyway, but the point I'm getting to is we've seen it. You really want to work on inference questions as a basis for getting everything else correct, because inference questions help us to understand what something says and what doesn't say and what are the implications. And if you practice that over and over again, then all the other questions come out better. Like we saw that one where must was really important. Well, there's a lot of inference questions that say something must be done is one of the answer choices. Well, does the passage say that or not? And we look for necessary versus sufficient conditions, So if you're super clear with all this stuff and what things say and don't say, then you're going to do better in all kinds of CR questions. So let's take a look at an inference question quickly to illustrate what I'm saying. Actually, to be clear, this is a conclusion question, but anyway, let's do it. Okay, another 15 seconds on this one. Any other ideas? Okay, cool. Let's do it. So this one, we have the total market value of real estate in Altonville has steadily declined over the past 4 years. This decline has meant that the overall figure on which the city's property tax is based, the assessed value of that real estate, has also declined. The percentage of assessed value that was paid as property taxes to the city, however, did not change from year to year during this period. And this is an interesting passage, and it says talking about percentages, it's talking about one thing that's related to another. We really have to pick up on the implications to get this question correct, right? And if you kind of mix up what everything is talking about, you're not going to get it correct. So this illustrates why these inference questions can be great practice. The point here is real estate value went down. That meant the assessed value went down, but the percentage of assessed value paid as property taxes did not go down. So basically, if the assessed value went down, but the percentage, like if you're paying 2% of assessed value, and that stayed the same, well, everybody paid a lower value of property taxes, right? So that the total would go down. But if we don't, we really need to see that. And I just want to show you how these inference questions, force us to really be clear about what's being said. Because look at these answer choices. Look at A. The percentage of Altonville's yearly revenue that was paid and that comes from money collected in property taxes did not change. Well, it did say that something didn't change. It said the percentage of assessed value didn't change. So, I mean, this is a great way to get some practice is saying, look, the passage was talking about percentage of assessed value. This is talking about percentage of yearly revenue that didn't change. I have to be clear that those are two different things. And, you do this over and over when you're doing these inference questions. And then when you get to a weekend question, you're like, wait, the premise was about, property tax. The conclusion was about, I don't know, a revenue or something. Are they really connected? Or total revenue? And you're noticing there's the big gap in the argument, right? Because you're so clued into saying what is being said specifically and what is being mentioned here and not mentioned. And it does it here again in B, the percentage of yearly revenue. Well, that's not mentioned in the passage. And it does say that comes from property taxes declined over the past 4 years. But once again, we have to be super specific because we know that we can infer from the passage that the total property taxes probably went down, but that doesn't mean the percentage of yearly revenue of the entire town, which we don't know anything. The passage didn't say anything about this percentage of the town's entire yearly revenue. Skipping C, going to D. During the past 4 years, Altonville officials increased tax rates on other sources of revenue, such as retail sales and business profits. Even though this choice definitely seemed wrong about 2/3 of the way through, definitely want to read the whole choice. Do this in art reading comprehension too. Read the whole answer choice, just make sure. But definitely the passage doesn't say anything, give us any information about what they did with rates on other sources of revenue. Altonville would soon require property owners to pay a higher percentage of the assessed value of their properties, property tax. Once again, we don't have anything about the future. And if we go back to E, the amount of revenue that Altonville collected from property taxes was lower last year than it was 4 years ago. Absolutely, because if the assessed value went down and the percentage didn't change, then you're not getting as much revenue because you're charging a same percentage on a lower base to get your revenue. Anyway, long story short, inference questions are great to practice, even if you're like focused on weekend or assumption. If you're working on assumption, maybe having a hard time or weekend or whatever it is, go do inference. Get very good at inference and then come back and see if you're doing better because you're being so careful about what is being said and not said. Yeah. Okay. And you get that, right? I've seen this with people I'm working with. We're doing argument question types, and it's just the little errors and just noticing what's being said, and we go do inference conclusion, then come back to the argument types after inference and conclusion, to get that better performance. And by the way, if you master inference, it's going to help you with data insights. It's going to help you with reading comp, so it's a great thing to focus on. Final thing, the final thing we're talking about, and and maybe you've noticed it, the final theme here is when you're doing a hard question. Some of the questions on the test are kind of easy. They're almost so easy they're hard, right? You're sitting there looking at, could it really be? They asked me to strengthen this argument, and that's all it is. It's pretty obvious, right? You're almost scared to choose your answer because it's so obvious. So, but a few of them are going to be pretty hard, and that's a lot of what we're talking about here today. Are the harder ones that we really have to be very careful, pay attention to those yellow flags, make sure we understand everything, totally get our setup right, and all that stuff. And my one of my last two tips is really go hard. You got to go like up the intensity. Like, look at this question about this one is going to take more energy than that other one where there was so obvious, right? Some of the questions take more energy, and you really just have to I got to go hard. So let's do this one. This one is a little funny. And you may be like, what on earth is correct here? You may end up eliminating all 5 answer choices. Just go hard until you find something that works. Tricky one, right? Definitely hard. Another few seconds. Let's see if you have any other thoughts. Okay. This one, yeah, this one's really interesting. There is a yellow flag. I mean, maybe I'll take another few seconds and think about your answer and think, do you feel a yellow flag? And take another look if you do. Are you a little worried about your answer? Do you really like your answer? If you don't like it, if you're not sure about it and you're saying, I'm not so sure, then think about maybe there's something else going on here. The correct answer really should click into place like the buckle of a seatbelt. When you get it, take that buckle, it just clicks right into place. The correct answer really should be like, oh, of course. That's definitely it. I mean, the questions aren't always perfectly written. But if you don't have that seatbelt buckle click feeling, then maybe your choice isn't correct. Okay. You ready? Let's do it. The new chancellor of Cranford University predicts that within a decade, one or more professors at the university will have won a prestigious international award in economics. That prediction is unlikely to be correct, however, it sounds like our conclusion, but let's see, since the economics department at Cranford University is not as strong as those of other universities, other universities. So the conclusion is that part about the prediction is unlikely to be correct, right? And the support for the conclusion is this follows the support marker, since the economics department is not as strong as those of other universities. So it's interesting. The new chancellor has predicted this, but the author of this argument is predicting against it on the basis of what? It's not as strong as the other universities. Okay, so that's interesting. Determining which of the following would be most helpful in evaluating the case for the conclusion drawn. So if you know how to answer an evaluate question, the correct answer will be something that if we know one way or the other, we'll be able to determine whether the conclusion is correct. So let's start with some of the easier outs here. Let's start with D. You know, might as well get some of the deadwood out of this question and not have to worry about all the answer choices. We can, if we don't have to think about as much, it might help. So going to D, whether any professors in departments other than economics at Cranford University have won prestigious international awards. Does it really matter whether professors in other departments have won? Probably not. You know, this is the GMAT. I don't think it's not gonna be that the professors in other departments have won, because that doesn't really tell us. A, what proportion of the professors at Cranford University work in the economics department? Well, you know, the proportion, that doesn't even tell us the number. I mean, clearly it has an economics department, so it's not 0. So A isn't going to work either. Okay, now we're down to the harder one. C, what is the average age of winners of prestigious international awards in economics? You know, C is interesting. It sounds relevant, but I have a question. Do we know the average age of the people in the economics department at Cranford University? No. So if the average age, let's answer our question. What is the average age? 75. Okay, maybe everyone at Cranford is 73. What is the average age of winners of prestigious international awards in economics? Maybe it's 22. Okay, do we know at the Cranford economics department? You know, we really don't know. Unless it's 2 years old, but I doubt it, you know. So it's not going to be C in any case, because we have no idea what the average age is of the members of the university economics department. It could be perfect for the answer to the question. So we're down to our 2 tough choices, which are B and E. So now some people did choose E, and it's a pretty interesting question. Whether any professors at Cranford University studied economics at one of the country's other universities. You know, it's really hard to eliminate, but I feel a little yellow flag with that one, because it says the economics department, our premises, and we can't really argue with this, is not as strong as those of the country's other universities. So even if somebody studied there, for whatever reason, the economics department at Cranford still isn't very strong, or not as strong. We don't, you know, honestly, it doesn't say how strong it is, but it's still not as strong as those of the country's other universities, even if somebody studied there. Studying and being strong are not the same thing, right? So I have a yellow flag, I feel a little ill picking that choice. When it doesn't have that seatbelt click, I don't feel confident at all. Could be correct somehow if the question isn't very good. But I'm going to go back to B. What proportion of the economics professors at the country's other universities have won prestigious international awards in economics? And here's where going hard, right? We're going to go hard because we don't like E. We got to go hard and see what's going on. And you know what? You might have given up on B quit pretty easily, but you got to go back and say, look, man, I'm not satisfied with anything yet. I'm going to go hard. I'm going to check, you know, see what's going on. Answer the question. That's the game with evaluate questions, is we answer the question as. Let's answer this question as. What proportion of the country's other universities or professors at the country's other universities have won prestigious international awards in economics? What if it's 100% or 90%? Well, then it sounds like winning a prestigious international award is actually pretty easy. So even if the economics department at Cranford University is not as strong as those of the other universities, there's still some chance that somebody at Cranford University is going to win an international award, right? Now let's try the other end of the spectrum. What proportion of the economics professors at the country's other universities have won awards? What if it's 1%? Well, if it's 1% at the stronger ones, then I guess Cranford is really going to have a tough time because they're not even as strong, and even the stronger ones, they're not winning them. So you can see, what's going on here is that we base the conclusion on the comparison between Cranford and the other universities, right? As not as strong as the others. Well, we didn't have a baseline for real though, because we don't know how strong the others are or what goes on with the others. B confirms the baseline by saying, well, either it's very easy for the others to win these awards, or it's very hard for the others to win the awards, making our baseline much clearer. So B was the correct answer, but man, do you have to go hard on this question because it certainly doesn't sound interesting. It sounds like it's off topic, right? So there's where our sophisticated thinking comes in. There's where our setup comes in too, right? Because if we're clear about what this premise is, the premise is that the other unit that's not as strong as the others, then we're like, wait a minute, well, what if we know more about the others? Setup has to be good. We have to stick it out. We have to pay attention to yellow flags. We have to read the answer choices in their entirety. And we have to really go hard until we find something that really clicks in place and you're totally in love with that answer. And as soon as you see B, as soon as you see how it works, you're like, you know what, that definitely works. You feel good. You went hard. You got it correct. So that's how we go hard and get these questions correct. And we're almost done for the day. The baseline doesn't, does it echo what we already know? It doesn't, because it says, the point is, what we already know is that the economics department at Cranford University is not as strong as the others. But we don't know really what that means. Do the others win international economics awards? The other ingredient we don't know is how easy is it to win an award if it's not as strong. Like someone says, well, Jim is not as strong as Sue, so Jim probably can't bench press 200 pounds. Well, I don't know. What does Sue bench press? If she bench presses 1,000 pounds, maybe he can. Right? So, yeah. So that helps. It brings in some new information that helps to confirm what the baseline is all about. The fact that, it's not a. So which one? Oh, which is it? What's this one? The fact that we know now with percentages that are stronger. No, it's not a premise echo because we don't. It says we're not echoing. We're not comparing any longer. We're not comparing Cranford with the other schools now with B. The premise compares Cranford with the other schools. The B compares the schools with how hard it, or compares how hard it is per inch. What am I saying? Tells you how hard it is to get the award. It's not just giving you percentage of strength. It's giving you the difficulty of getting the award. It's new information. Okay. So so we're talking about the tip 6 of 7, maintain a relaxed intensity, go hard and be determined and thorough, and be thorough and precise in your execution. Look, I'm going to get this right. I'm going to be thorough. You're going to be, it's a relaxed intensity, right? You're going hard. The timing is an issue, but you're relaxed in a way, you're just intense. Rise to the challenges of each question in front of you, right? Like some of them are going to not be so hard, but some of them are, and then you got to rise to that challenge, right? And realize this is a harder one. I got to put more energy into this one. I have to fight my way through this one. And when you're practicing, think of that. Some questions, even if they're rated hard, might be easy for you, and some that are rated easier might be harder for you. Rise to the challenge of the question for you. Finally, push hard to find something that clearly indicates that one particular answer is correct. If you feel that thing in your pit of your stomach and you're not sure, that yellow flag, go back and go hard and find something. I'm going to go back to the passage, check that, check whatever you have to do. Go through the choices, think about what they say. You're looking. What do I have to see? What do I have to see? Go hard until you figure out the answer. And that's a key part of how you're going to get your accuracy high, Okay. So, okay, still a question. Let me see what you're asking. If we try to use extremes, if it's very high percentage, then Cranford will definitely No, not really. Because let's be real. If a very high percentage of the other professors are getting them, then it doesn't mean that they are stronger. I get it now, right? I mean, but because it's not saying that Cranford, it never said that Cranford doesn't win the awards and the other ones do or something. Or it never said that I mean, the fact that the others win the awards, yes, they're stronger. But it's still interesting. I mean, I see what you mean, that it kind of indicates that the others are way stronger if they're all winning awards, but we don't even know if Cranford won an award, to be honest. So we can't even make that comparison. But the final thing is, if everybody's getting awards, common knowledge would tell us, well, or at least there's a good sum. That's interesting information, right? Even if we're not sure what the dynamic is, it's interesting information. Wait, everybody wins those stupid awards. The International Awards of Participation Trophy. Well, hello, then Cranford's probably going to win some too. Okay, final tip is to optimize your practice for increasing accuracy. And this is practice makes or breaks your success in critical reasoning. How you practice is going to be key. When practicing, shoot for quality over quantity. I've had students, who are doing 10 questions a day get a perfect score, right? Why? Because they're emailing me and saying, hey man, what do you think about choice A? They're putting such high quality into each question. Each question has 5 answer choices. And if you really, as you saw, analyze them in a very sophisticated way, pay attention to those yellow flags, it could take you 10 minutes per question as you're doing them, right? At least initially. Yes, we want to get the time down, but you're shooting for quality over quantity. So if you do 10 or 20 maybe questions a day, or 15 or 12, that can be great. I've seen plenty of people get very, very high verbal scores by doing just, well under 20 questions a day. You're getting that quality. You're really thinking about every answer choice, because that's what you want to do, is develop skill in analyzing the choices and articulating what's going on. That's going to get you to the high accuracy. Do most of your practice on time, prioritizing learning to do what it takes to get the questions correct, right? So if you do them on time, you have time to think, you have time to ponder, you have time to do all the things we've been doing. And yes, you want to learn to do that time. And you know what happens? The more you ponder it, it's like any kind of job. You're going to get better and faster at it. And you can work on the time too. You can think about, well, how could I do this faster? But a lot of the time, you at least want to be flexible with the time, because you're not going to learn anything by doing them so fast you don't even have time to get them correct. You're just going to get them wrong, then read someone else's explanation, and that, you have to learn to get the explanation yourself. After, do them one at a time is the next thing. And then after each question, rate your performance. Right after that question, it's way better than doing 10 in a row or 15 or 20 in a row and then rating your performance going back. Let's say you miss question 2 if you do that, right? Well, then you don't even know you missed it, and you do another 15, you shouldn't, and you like, oh, I should have paid attention to that yellow flag. Yeah, now you know it, but you just did another 18 questions. You're better off doing them one at a time. Rate your performance, identifying issues, and develop skill from question to question, right? Oh, I need to read more carefully. Oh, I need to read the whole answer choice. Oh, I have to be more sophisticated, right? You catch that. Then the next question, you do it right away. You don't even need an error log this way, right? Because you're picking up the patterns right away and addressing them. And you do the next, you're gamifying this, right? You're looking at, okay, what can I do better next time? I'm not going to blow up. Develop skill from question to question. And finally, use the streaks method to put your focus on what matters for high accuracy. So shoot for streaks of correct answers. If you shoot for streaks of correct answers, then when you break your streak, you're so focused on not breaking that streak, you really don't want to break that streak. You're shooting for a streak of 20, you get to 17, man, you are going to pay attention to those yellow flags. You are going to get your setup right, because you want to get to that 20, so you've gamified it and put your focus on what matters. And I'll show you what I mean. Here's some of these streaks tracker. You can see when she started, she was getting like, a few correct and then breaking her streak. And then up later here, okay, so then she started with, getting those top 3 correct, right? And then she misses a couple and breaks her streak. And nice color coding here, right? If anybody wants this streaks tracker, by the way, just send me an email. I can send it to you. But anyway, let's see my pen tip. So, okay. So then now look what she did. She's noting what she did here, right? She didn't calculate right 2 times in a row. And this isn't CR, this is actually data insights, but it's so interesting, right? So twice in a row, she caught a calculation error. So there's a behavior pattern she's identified. Now you go to the next one. Okay, you get that one correct. Now she's noticing reading issues, right? read what's being asked for more carefully. So she caught these calculation issues and these reading issues. Those are two huge patterns for her, apparently, because once she discovered them, look what happens to her streak. Now it's huge, right? She goes from streaks of 1 or 2 or 1 or 3 to a streak of 14. You know, and why? Because she caught those two patterns, and that's a lot of how you're going to get your accuracy up, right? You catch what you do in the moment, gamify your prep, and learn to get them correct. I see a question or two coming in. Do you always practice without worrying about the clock, even at the last leg or so of our prep? No, because yeah, I would say that you sometimes worry about the clock, right? You sometimes worry about the clock, especially, you know, when you're getting near to taking practice tests. I remember taking a practice test and I was so used to pondering the questions for 5 minutes each, and I'm like, whoa, I only have 2 minutes now, you know? So definitely do some time practice toward the end of your prep. But, and also, you know, even if you're doing it untimed, you can be thinking about the time, right? You can say, okay, that took me 5 minutes. I got it correct. Is there any way I can get it correct and do all these things right and get it done in 4 or 2 or 3? You know, can I shave the time down a little bit? And then notice which ones, you know, maybe your percentage of them that you're getting done in 2 minutes or less or whatever it is. So you're not totally discounting the time. You might, because you can be pondering that too. Say, how could I, you know, just as we're rating our performance on catching yellow flags or being sophisticated or whatever else, you can rate your performance on the time and say, okay, that was pretty good. You know, did I reread something I didn't need to reread? If my setup had been better, that's a big thing with time too. Getting your setup right can save you so much time. If you have the passage totally clear, you know what the correct answer must do and all that good stuff, have the details, then you go through those answer choices and you quickly see what's correct. Sometimes the answer will jump right at you. So yeah, it's all kind of part and parcel of the same thing, right? So yeah, you can do that, right? So you're paying attention to your accuracy and your setup and everything else, and how's that affecting whether you get the question correct and how fast you do it, all at the same time. But you have to get them correct, though, definitely. So time is a priority. Accuracy is a priority. Okay, cool. So this is the streaks method. Someone was asking about it. You're shooting for streaks of questions correct in a row, not just accuracy, but you set a benchmark for yourself. Say, I want to get 15 correct in a row or 20 correct in a row, and then you shoot for that. And if you miss one, you go back to 0, as this person did, and start over again until you get to the actual full streak. And it works great. The streaks tell all. With the people working with me, we can so often tell exactly how they're going to score on the test by how long their streaks are. You know, sometimes people aren't getting the greatest streaks and they still score pretty high. But if someone is getting very long streaks, you're almost guaranteed to be scoring high on the test. So finally, be confident that you can increase your accuracy because all this stuff works. If you know what you're doing, you know what you're looking for, you know, you get these ideas, you do the streaks method, you're going to get that high accuracy, right? Can we get this sheet? Which one? If you mean the streaks template, yeah, I can send it to you. I have a template for that. If you want the PowerPoint slides also, just send me with an email. I can send them to you as well. You just hit me at Marty Murray Coaching, Marty at martymurraycoaching.com with an email, and I can send you either the streaks tracker template, which has been great for a lot of people with the color coding, or the PowerPoint slides. Let me know if you have any other questions before we go. What third-party questions do you use most on GMAT Club aside from OG? Yeah, good question. You can use GMAT Prep Classic. Is not third-party, I understand, but it's GMAT Prep Classic as opposed to GMAT Prep Focus. Don't use those because GMAT Prep Focus are the ones from the current practice test, so you'll wreck the practice test for yourself. But GMAT Prep Classic, GMAT Paper Test, Power Prep, anything that doesn't say GMAT Prep Focus on it. And there's a little crossover sometimes, so if you see the GMAT Prep Focus tag, don't use that. LSAT is good. I have a bunch. There's a thing called questions by experts. I have a bunch of critical reasoning questions on there. So questions by experts are probably pretty good because those are all vetted by a GMAT Club to see whether they work. So those are good. You know, GMAT Club's been going through and trying to remove all the busted third-party questions. So you're going to see those less and less. So you could probably, you know, a lot of third-party questions work. Some of them are a little weird. Manhattan is decent. Veritas is okay. Sometimes sketchy. Anything else? LSAT is those are solid, although the harder ones can be kind of weird and sometimes don't work. I guess that those are some of the best ones. GMAT Ninja might have some up there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. That's pretty much it. But honestly, I have a student that's using all of them, and she's getting pretty good. You know, and she said, "Yeah, these weird questions are helping me with the OG questions. Seem so easy after these weird questions, because most of the third-party questions basically work. You know, even if they're kind of weird, you can usually find your way to an answer. I know that 1 out of 10 maybe doesn't work so well, but anyway, long story short, I think I gave you an answer to that. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Okay, I guess that's it for today. It's been great. It's been super fun. I hope it was fun for you. I always love doing these. We're going to do a couple more this year and on some other verbal topics. And as I said, there's some listed below below in the description. There's some links to some other sessions we did before. Appreciate you all coming out. Have a great rest of your day and take care.